Rabbi Laura Jonathan Sacks believed profoundly in the power of the written word and authored many books and articles that addressed major trends and issues of the day through the lens of Jewish values and Jewish texts. In an effort to honor his creative contributions and scholarship, Yeshiva University has created the Sacks Book Prize, generously funded by the Rohr family, to broaden the impact of Jewish scholarship in the arena of contemporary Jewish thought. The prize aims to recognize recent publications of ideas deeply sourced in Jewish texts with wide appeal within and beyond the Jewish community. I'm Dr. Shira Weiss, Assistant Director of Yeshiva University's Sacks-Herenstein Center for Values and Leadership, and I was privileged to be joined by Lady Elaine Sacks, Professor Robbie George of Princeton University, Adam Kirsch of the Wall Street Journal, and Professor Daniel Reinhold, Dean of the Bernard Revel Graduate School of YU, to judge over 45 submissions of manuscripts published this year for the inaugural Sacks Book Prize. We're thrilled to announce as the winner of the Sacks Book Prize 2022, Becoming Elijah by Daniel Matt, published by Yale University Press as part of their Jewish Lives series. Daniel traces the prophet Elijah's transformation from fierce zealot to compassionate hero and cherished figure in the Jewish tradition. Through this discussion, we'll get to know Daniel, what he has learned from the prophet, and what he hopes to contribute through his work. Daniel Matt is a scholar of Kabbalah and the Zohar. He's published over a dozen books, including The Essential Kabbalah and God and the Big Bang, Discovering Harmony Between Science and Spirituality. Some years ago, Daniel completed an 18-year project of translating and annotating the Zohar. In 2016, Stanford University Press published his 9th volume of the Zohar Pritzker edition, concluding the Zohar's main commentary on the Torah. For this work, Daniel has been honored with the National Jewish Book Award and a Koret Jewish Book Award. The Koret Award hailed it as a monumental contribution to the history of Jewish thought. Daniel received his PhD from Brandeis University and for 20 years served as professor in the Center for Jewish Studies at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, California. He's also taught at Stanford University and the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and currently teaches Zohar online. Welcome, Daniel. Dr. Erica Brown, Vice Provost and Director of the Sacks-Herenstein Center at YU, joins me in congratulating you on this award. This prize is named in memory of Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks to honor his legacy. What does Rabbi Sacks's scholarship mean to you?
I think the most important thing is just how he engaged the modern world. He was someone firmly rooted in Jewish tradition and a teacher and a guide. And yet he insisted on being open to the world. He was strongly, eternally committed to the Jewish people, but open to the wisdom one can find in other traditions, willing to engage in dialogue. So that's what meant most to me.
In Becoming Elijah, you present such a comprehensive analysis of texts about the prophet, from the Hebrew Bible, the Talmud and Midrash, the Kabbalah, in Jewish ritual like the Pesach Seder, circumcision, Havdalah, and as you wrote, how Elijah overleaps religious boundaries as you analyze his role in Christian and Islamic texts. What was your conception of Elijah as a prophet when you began this project, especially as a Kabbalah scholar? And how did your perception of him evolve as a result of your study?
Yeah, Elijah is so familiar to Jews and, to a lesser extent to Christians and Muslims. It's almost hard to get through a week without encountering him in some way or another. Anyone who's traditional and observant will mention him 3 times a day in Birkat HaMazon. And of course, Havdalah, when Shabbat ends, we sing to Eliyahu. Even Jews who are totally uncommitted and don't step foot in a synagogue will have something to do with Elijah at the Seder. So it's hard to get away from him. He's so familiar, and yet he seems so different. If you actually open the Bible and see what's said about him as a biblical prophet, he's a fierce zealot. So what intrigued me most is the radical change, what I came to see as a transformation of Elijah, the biblical zealot, into a compassionate hero. So to trace that arc was really what I was trying to do. And as I got further and further into it, I realized that what Elijah really is, of course, very hard to define. He's someone who's suffused by God. You just take his name, right? There are many biblical names that have some divine element in them. But Eliyahu has 2. Eliyahu, my God is Yud-He Vav-He. So he's permeated by God. You might say sometimes he seems obsessed by God. And he's fighting on behalf of God. He's jealous. He's jealous on behalf of God. He's not jealous of God. He's jealous for God because he feels that people have betrayed God. So in the Bible, he's desperately trying to bring the people of Israel back to the belief in the one God. And that he's battling for that. The famous contest on Mount Carmel, where he takes on the 450 prophets of Baal. And the people love a contest, so they're willing to witness that. And first, the prophets of Baal try to call down fire from heaven to burn up their sacrifice. Elijah says, maybe you should shout a little louder. Maybe Baal is sleeping. Some people say this is the first element of sarcasm in the Bible. That the claim has actually been made that Elijah invented sarcasm. He says, maybe you should shout a little louder. Maybe Baal is off on a journey. Maybe he's relieving himself. And of course, the prophets don't succeed, and Elijah immediately calls down fire from heaven. So he defeats the enemies of God. That's his role in the Bible, but he's harsh and he's severe, he's extreme. What does he do when he defeats the prophets of Baal? He doesn't convert them to monotheism, he slaughters them. So that's Elijah in the Bible. And yet we think of Elijah as compassionate, as saving people, visiting people, finally announcing the Mashiach. So it was really that radical change I wanted to explore.
Can you share a little bit more for those who haven't yet read your book, the nature of this transformation specifically depicted from the earlier verses, the later texts, and also how he's distinct from other prophets, both in terms of depictions of him in the literal text and also in terms of interpretations of him in later rabbinic sources?
Some people say that we shouldn't overstate the case, right? Because in the Bible, Elijah is certainly also compassionate, right? He brings back to life the son of a widow who dies. He feeds the widow and her son miraculously, and then the child seems to die or be on the verge of death. Elijah revives him. So he is compassionate, but notice right there, it seems like he overcomes death. So already in the Bible, there's something about Elijah that can defy the normal boundaries of human existence. The Bible never says that Elijah didn't die. Right at the end of Elijah's career, he's anointed, he's commissioned Elisha, his disciple. He's prepared Elisha to take on his role. And then Elijah and Elisha are walking by the Jordan, and suddenly a chariot of fire appears and takes Elijah up to heaven. So he goes up to heaven in a whirlwind, in a chariot of fire. It doesn't say that he died. It doesn't say he didn't die. But Elisha, his disciple, thinks that Elijah has died. How do we know that? Because Elisha tears his clothes. Elisha sees Elijah being taken up to heaven, and Elisha tears his clothes in mourning, thinking that Elijah has died. So it's unclear. Either Elijah has died a spectacular death, or he's escaped death entirely. And then there's one more mention of Elijah in the Bible, one major mention of Elijah in the Bible before we get to the rabbis. And that's in the prophet Malachi, right? This is the last prophet in the Hebrew Bible. After Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and those 12 so-called minor prophets, the last of those 12 prophets is Malachi. And at the end of the book of Malachi, what does Malachi say? Conveying God's word. Hinei anochi sholeach lachem et Eliyah hanavi. Here I am sending to you Elijah the prophet. Here he's called Eliyah instead of Eliyahu. A couple of times in the Bible you find that Eliyah. So Malachi ends by saying, I'm sending Elijah the prophet before the day of Yud He Vav He, before the final cataclysmic day ending all of history. The rabbis took this to mean that Elijah is going to come right before the Mashiach. Okay, the Bible doesn't say literally before the Mashiach, but Malachi says before the day of Yud He Vav He. So there's already a prediction in the Bible before we get to rabbinic literature that Elijah is somehow, he hasn't died, or he hasn't died normally. He's available. He's up in heaven and he's available. So it's not hard for the rabbis to say he will announce the Mashiach, and that becomes one of his major roles. Before we get to to the rabbis. It's interesting. There is one other figure in the Bible who seems to go up to heaven, right? And that's Hanoch, Enoch. Right at the beginning of Genesis, it says, "Vayitale Hanoch et Elohim." Enoch walked with God, and he was no more, because God took him. Ki lakach oto Elohim. What does that mean? That God took him. It could mean he took his life, or it could mean he took him up to heaven, and he became an angel. Later, that was the interpretation. So the Bible doesn't say that Enoch lived forever, but later tradition says he went up to heaven. So we have two people who went up to heaven in the Hebrew Bible. The only two people who possibly went up to heaven in the Hebrew Bible, Enoch and Elijah. But what's the difference? Enoch never comes down, right? If you're in heaven, why leave? Enoch is happy to stay in heaven. Elijah comes back to earth, according to the rabbis. He's available. So that's really, I would say, the fulcrum right there. Elijah is going up to heaven. We know from the Hebrew Bible, he's going to return at some point. So the rabbis take it from there, and they develop a figure who's almost half an angel. He seems to be an angel. He's compared to other angels. And yet he is not like other angels, because he's still irascible. He's still human. He has failings, he has faults, but he's working on himself. The way I came to see this after working on the book for quite a while was that you could describe it in two ways. Either the rabbis are making a tikkun. They are redeeming Elijah. They can't handle someone who's so harsh, who's so severe, who's such an extremist. They turn Elijah into a more compassionate figure. You could say that. Or you could say, I think more interestingly, Elijah learns to mend himself. He undertakes the tikkun. Over the centuries, over a couple millennia, Elijah learns to transform his rage into compassion. And that's why I think the story is relevant for today, where there's so much extremism and so much hatred. And Elijah is someone who was fierce, a fierce enemy of the other, and he becomes the one who will bring peace. The rabbis say, not only will he announce the Messiah, he will resolve all doubts. Whatever doubts we have in halachic decision and legal decisions, whatever we're left puzzled by, Elijah will solve those doubts. Another rabbi says he'll bring peace. He will bring peace. He will usher in the Messiah. It's not just that he'll announce the Messiah. It's almost that Elijah and the Mashiach are working together. So that transformation happens gradually.
That idea, that second interpretation you just mentioned, reminded me of a source by Rabbi Soloveitchik, who attributed the idea to a Kabbalistic text, but talked about the distinction between destructive and constructive forces in oneself. And he says destructive forces are much more aggressive, whereas constructive forces are a little bit more steady and calm. But he says that destructive forces, when channeled in a constructive way, allows the individual to surpass their previous status. A little bit of what you said made me think, according to that second interpretation, that Elijah did this tikkun for himself, perhaps as a result of his experiences, as a prophet for the people, as a result of the lessons he learned, and through his own maturation. Perhaps he took those, what could be perceived as more negative or destructive qualities, and channeled them in a constructive way.
Yes, I think that's tremendous. That's really what Elijah does. It's because he has these negative qualities, and he somehow is able to channel that chaotic energy into a constructive way. So he's bringing about the tikkun. He can stimulate others to do tshuva. Right, one of Eliyahu's central roles is to stimulate Israel to engage in teshuvah, in turning back to God. He's seen as the master of teshuvah in rabbinic sources. So he draws on his own failings, and he transforms that from within, with all the dramatic and aggressive and even violent actions. The revelation to Elijah at Mount Sinai is remarkable. Right after the contest at Carmel, you could say that's Elijah's greatest moment. He thinks that he's actually succeeded in bringing Israel back to God. And you remember that the people respond when Elijah finally calls down fire from heaven to consume the sacrifice. The people fall on their faces and they say, what? Hashem hu ha-Elohim. Hashem hu ha-Elohim, right? Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh is God. Now, what happens to that phrase? That phrase becomes the conclusion of Yom Kippur. You could say one of the most dramatic moments of the Jewish ritual year, the conclusion of Yom Kippur, the final service, Ne'ilah. At the end of Ne'ilah, the cantor chants and the congregation responds 7 times instead of 2 times, Hashem hu ha-Elohim. That's clearly taken from the Elijah saga. So that's Elijah's greatest moment of triumph. But what happens? He actually runs with King Ahab. He runs ahead of Ahab's chariot all the way back to King Ahab's palace. And this is his greatest moment of triumph. But Jezebel, right? The wicked Jezebel, always blame it on the woman. The wicked Jezebel, it was her prophets whom Elijah defeated and actually slaughtered. So Jezebel now threatens Elijah's life and he has to run off. He heads down to Beersheba and further into the desert. And then he finds himself wandering to Sinai. Goes all the way to Mount Sinai. How long does it take him to get there? 40 days and 40 nights, making us think of Moses at Mount Sinai. So Elijah is at Mount Sinai and God actually reveals himself to Elijah. But first, there's kind of a negative theology. There's a wind, earthquake, fire, but the Bible says God was not in the wind. God was not in the earthquake. God was not in the fire. And finally, there's what? Kol demama daka. Many of us know that from the King James Version, a still small voice. But the Hebrew really means a sound of sheer stillness. And that may mean, who knows what exactly it means. It's such a dramatic, powerful moment. You could say it's an indication that you find God in stillness. But it could also be seen as God's critique of Elijah. You've been, attacking the people. You've been fiercely defending the faith. But the way a prophet can reach his flock is not necessarily with these loud phenomena, but with a gentle approach. That's how that verse is interpreted in some later traditions.
Interesting. And how do other faith traditions like Christianity and Islam interpret references to Elijah?
It's remarkable. Elijah is obviously central in Jewish tradition. As I said, it's almost hard to get away from him if you're at all observant or traditional. And if you're not at all observant or traditional, you still run into him every Seder. And the Seder itself is fascinating. But Elijah is not limited to the Jewish people. He's such a nationalist. He's such a chauvinist in the Bible. And yet, it's interesting, the very first miracle that he performs in the book of Kings is for a non-Israelite, for the widow of Tzorfat, the widow of Sarepta. And in Christian tradition and in Islamic tradition, Elijah is very prominent. For example, in Christianity, I mentioned that the last prophet of the Hebrew Bible, Malachi, has God saying, I am sending you, Elijah the prophet, before the day of the Lord, before the day of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. So that comes at the end of the Nevi'im, comes at the end of the prophets. But in the Christian Old Testament, that verse, those concluding verses of Malachi, actually conclude the entire Old Testament, right? Because the ordering of the books in the Christian Old Testament is somewhat different than the Hebrew Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. So you could say the Christian Old Testament ends with the prediction that Elijah will come to announce the end of days. What's the very next page in a Christian Bible? The Gospel of Matthew. So Elijah plays a role in the New Testament. He's actually identified as John the Baptist. Jesus identifies John the Baptist as Elijah. Why? Because Elijah will announce the coming of the Messiah. And for the Christians, Elijah will announce Christ. So that's remarkable. And because of that, Elijah is very prominent. I would say also that there's also evidence that Jesus, at an earlier point in his career, identified with Elijah. And he may have seen himself in the mold of an Old Testament prophet. Islam is also has their relationship to Elijah. Elijah isn't mentioned in the Quran, but believers, Muslims believe that he's alluded to in the Quran. He's called a servant of Allah. And he's later given the name the Green One. In Arabic, Al-Khidr, the green one. Of course, green is the most prominent color in Islam. And in a desert environment, what could be more precious than anything green? Elijah is identified as the green one. He's described in ways that are remarkably similar to Elijah. He appears as an old man, but he can appear in different forms. And that's one of the remarkable things about Elijah. We can get back to that. Elijah is a shapeshifter. He can take on different personalities in order to redeem who's ever in trouble at the moment. And Al-Khidr performs a similar task. And furthermore, we'll soon talk about Elijah and the Kabbalah, or we have talked about Elijah and the Kabbalah. In Islam, Al-Khidr, the Elijah figure, is the one who inspires the mystics. The great Sufi mystics report that they were visited by Al-Khidr. And finally, I'd say about Islam, a very remarkable thing is that Jews who lived in Muslim lands, actually, some of them came to call Elijah Al-Khidr. For them, the two were totally identified. And that's why you find shrines in many, many places where Al-Khidr will be venerated. We shouldn't say worshipped, because you can't worship a human. Al-Khidr is venerated by Muslims. Elijah would be venerated by Christians and Jews. For example, on Mount Carmel, Christians and Jews and Muslims go to what's called the Cave of Elijah to venerate this one figure who's called by different names.
When you describe Elijah as a shapeshifter, is that the ultimate praise of a prophet, being able to cater or address the different needs of their people?
Yeah, that's, there's some very colorful stories in the Talmud about Elijah appearing at the last moment, right? Saving someone who's fallen from the roof or helping someone who's destitute. There's a remarkable story in the Talmud about Rabbi Meir and his encounter with Elijah. Maybe I could read that briefly. So Rabbi Meir was a famous figure in the Mishnah, and his sister-in-law was condemned to prison, to a horrible prison, to a brothel in Rome, and Rabbi Meir rescued her. But because Rabbi Meir rescued her, the Romans were out to get him, and they actually posted his portrait on the gates of Rome. So Rabbi Meir's portrait was posted on the gates of Rome, and the Romans proclaimed, anyone who sees this face, bring him. So some Roman officers saw Rabbi Meir, they ran up to him, he ran away, and some say that Elijah appeared just at that moment in the form of a prostitute. Elijah embraced Rabbi Meir, and the Roman soldiers said, that can't be Rabbi Meir, he would never do that. They left, and thereby Elijah saved Rabbi Meir. So he's able to take on different forms. He can be a Roman dignitary, a horseman, a Persian, whatever form needs to be taken at the time. Elijah, remarkably, in other words, Elijah is not limited to his biblical personality and his post-biblical career. He appears in these different forms. One of the strangest is the rabbinic statement that identifying Elijah with Pinchas. Pinchas is the other great zealot in the Bible, right? Pinchas lived in the time of Moses. He's spoken about in the Torah, in the book of Numbers. Elijah lived several hundred years later, so there's no way historically that Pinchas could be related to Elijah, certainly not identical with Elijah, but the rabbis saying there's one tradition, it doesn't appear openly in rabbinic literature, but it becomes very popular in the Middle Ages and in Kabbalah. The statement is simply Pinchas hu Eliyahu. Pinchas is Elijah. I used to think that what that meant was that they share that trait of zealotry. Right. And you could say that's why they're identified, but the statement actually means, no, Pinchas lived long enough that he became Elijah. He just changed his name. Now, as I say, that's an impossible statement, but what it shows you is that zealotry was his defining trait, and yet he learns to love. He learns to channel that chaotic, destructive, aggressive energy into something redemptive. And another important element here is ruach, right? Ruach, that beautiful Hebrew word that can mean wind or spirit or soul. Elijah is pictured as carried along by the ruach, right? One servant of King Ahab actually says to Elijah, I can't lose sight of you, because if you leave, what will happen? Ruach Hashem yisa'acha al asher lo eda. The spirit of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the wind of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh will carry you off to I know not where. Literally, that's what the verse says. God's Ruach will carry you off to I know not where. So already in the Bible, it seemed that Elijah could be taken away, and he develops that quality. He becomes an angel. The Talmud actually says that the Talmud describes how fast Elijah can fly compared to other angels. The Talmud says Michael, the archangel Michael, can reach his destination in one glide. Gabriel takes 2 glides. Elijah takes 4 glides. It takes Elijah a little slower. He's not quite as fast as the fastest angel, but the Talmud's interested, how far can he fly? But I want to say this, it's not only that Eliyahu learns how to navigate the Ruach, right? He learns how to reach places he has to reach. It's a particular kind of Ruach that he masters, and that's Ruach HaKodesh. You really could say that Eliyahu is or becomes an embodiment of Ruach HaKodesh. He appears to spiritual seekers, but he appears to people who are in need, but he also appears to spiritual seekers and teaches them new Torah. He reveals new understandings to a sincere mystic, to a sincere spiritual seeker. And the question is, what's actually going on in that encounter? Is Elijah inspiring someone from the outside, externally, or is Elijah awakening some spiritual wisdom within the person? You find fascinating descriptions of that process, an inner process and an outer process. Maybe I could read one or two
Sure.
short passages. These are really remarkable. When a Kabbalist encounters Elijah, is he meeting the genuine and eternal prophet or imagining him in his mind? According to Moses Cordovero in the 16th century, the two possibilities are not distinct. Quote, sometimes Elijah clothes himself in a person's mind, revealing to him hidden matters. To the person, it seems as if he pondered those things on his own, as if that innovation suddenly entered his mind. This may relate to matters of Torah or to worldly matters, with Elijah informing him what will happen and what will not happen. This comes in a concealed manner. It feels as if he said it himself. So this is a Kabbalist saying Elijah might appear to you, but it's not certain to you whether this is coming from within or from without. So that's what I find remarkable. You would imagine the description would be Elijah came to me and told me this. But sometimes the mystic is aware that this is an internal process. So there's some interplay of the within and the beyond. And I think that's really how you could describe a mystical experience. You go so deep within that you discover something beyond. And Elijah is the link. Elijah is the one who conveys this. That's what I meant. He's an embodiment of the Holy Spirit, or he conveys the Holy Spirit. He elicits it. He stimulates it.
Fascinating. And how is Elijah depicted through the different rituals in Judaism?
Yeah, Elijah is so prominent in rituals, and many Jews know of Elijah only through rituals like the Seder. Sometimes people are surprised when I tell them Elijah actually does appear in the Bible. If you read the Bible, you see him, of course. It's about 7 chapters in the Book of Kings, but who reads the Book of Kings? So many people think that Elijah just popped up later. Even in the Bible, he appears suddenly out of nowhere. But it's in ritual life that Elijah becomes especially prominent. And here too, it's interesting, these seem to be very significant moments. They're not just any old rituals, right? The Seder is the most familial moment of the year in the Jewish home. you could say. And circumcision is such a vital, tense moment. And Havdalah marking the end of every Shabbat. So why does Elijah show up every Saturday night? And why you can't have a Pesach Seder without him. You can't have a ritual circumcision without him. But before we get to the specifics, what's remarkable is that in the Bible, Elijah is really very much of a loner, right? He's off on his own.
Right.
We don't hear of his being married. We don't hear of any children, any descendants. Right? He may have lived forever, but he has no progeny. And yet he's invited into the family. It's almost like he needs to be invited, perhaps. He's a loner and he's off wandering and carried by the Ruach here and there. And then he's invited into the family at these wonderful and crucial moments. So first, the Seder. Why does Elijah appear at the Seder? You could say the simplest reason is that Elijah is going to announce the coming of the Mashiach, and Pesach is the celebration of redemption. It's a celebration of redemption from Egypt, but it's also seen as the time when the Mashiach will come, according to some traditional descriptions. So it makes sense that Elijah would come to announce the Mashiach if the time is right. But we have, not just that general connection. We open the door for Elijah at some point during the Seder. There's a cup for Elijah. Why those two things? Well, opening the door, that originally is not even necessarily connected with Elijah. There are other reasons to open the door on Pesach. One is near the beginning of the Seder, we say, Kol dichfin yete v'yechul. Everyone who is hungry, let them come and eat. So maybe you could open the door to invite in a nearby hungry person. Or you might say another explanation, that the night of Pesach is called Leil Shimurim, the night of watch. So this is a night when God is protecting Israel, and there was a custom to leave the door open or to leave the door unlocked. We're so protected, you don't have to lock the door normally. It's also a night when it's traditionally the Shema is not recited going to bed. So if God is protecting you, you don't have to pray for God's protection. So it's a night of protection. So therefore, some people opened the door, left the door open. But gradually, the custom developed very gradually, really not till the 10th century that we hear anything about Elijah, about opening the door specifically for Elijah. Okay, this is someone writing in the 11th century, Nisim Gaon, describing why people open the door for Elijah. Quote, I saw that my father would not close the doors of our house at all. And until now, this is our custom. And on the night of Passover, the doors of the house are open. When Elijah comes, we'll go out to greet him quickly, without any delay. That's remarkable because he's saying it's not that we're opening the door so Elijah will come in. We're opening the door so we can go out, so we can go out to greet him. If he's going to come, if he's going to announce the redemption, we want to catch him. So we open the door so we can go out to him. But then gradually the door was opened so that Elijah would come in. What about the cup? Why a cup of wine for Elijah? This is a beautiful explanation. Apparently it's an Ashkenazic custom. And in the 15th century, it still is not widespread. Here's what one author writes. I've seen some people on the night of Pesach who pour a special cup and place it on the table, saying that this is the cup for Elijah the prophet. And I don't know the reason. Okay, this is a rabbi saying, I don't know the reason. And this is typical of many of these customs. The custom developed, the custom was followed, and then the rabbis try to come up with a reason. They explain it after the fact. But it seems that the reason derives from this. Okay, he's guessing at the reason. He doesn't know the reason. He's saying, I think this is the reason. If Elijah the prophet comes on the night of Passover, as we hope and expect, right? He's expecting Elijah because it's the holiday of redemption. He too will need a cup. He'll need a cup of wine. For even a poor person among Israel must drink no less than 4 cups. Okay, if Elijah comes, okay, maybe he's an angel, but he still follows halakha. He's still involved in Torah and study and observance and mitzvot. So he's going to need a cup. If the cup isn't ready, we'd have to prepare it for him, which might delay the Seder. What could be worse than delaying the Seder, right? It's long enough already. Maybe it's Motzei Shabbat and it's not starting till 10 p.m. So you don't want to delay the Seder. So that's why you pour the cup. In case Eliyahu comes, he'll have his cup. Here's another one. This is a Sephardic rabbi in the 17th century. So for him, it's still a new custom. He's discovered it. It seems this is the custom I saw among a few Ashkenazim, to leave on the table one empty cup, in which to pour all the wine left over in the cups of all those reclining there, right after they've drunk at least the required minimum. So everyone drinks whatever they need to drink, and what's left they pour into this one large cup, right? Some people still follow this custom today. This cup is called Kos Eliyahu, the cup of Elijah the prophet, gratefully remembered. This custom pleased me, and I follow it. From the remains of those cups poured into this cup, I drink during the meal. Okay, some people didn't like that particular addition to the custom. But the best reason, let me read this too, is from the Gaon of Vilna.
Okay.
The Gaon of Vilna, right, the greatest Talmudic authority of the 18th century, and still someone so revered. The Gaon of Vilna tried to explain why we have the cup of Elijah, why we have Kos Eliyahu, and this is what he says. We have the custom of pouring a fifth cup and calling it the cup of Elijah the prophet. The reason, okay, he doesn't say, I think the reason, he says the reason is that there is a dispute in the Gemara over whether one needs a fifth cup. Okay, there is a dispute in the Talmud. Should you drink 4 cups or 5 cups? Okay, now we drink 4 cups, but the Gaon of Vilna says that's the reason really for this. Why? How so? There's a dispute in the Gemara and the Talmud over whether one needs a 5th cup, and the halacha is not determined. Okay, the decision is not reached in the Talmud. When Elijah comes, the doubt will be clarified. Right? That's Elijah's role, to clarify all doubts, especially halachic doubts. So Elijah will clarify this doubt too. The Gaon of Vilna goes on. Therefore, based on this doubt, the cup is poured but not drunk. And it's called Kos Eliyahu. It's called the cup of Elijah, for when Elijah comes, all doubts will be clarified, including this doubt. So that's a great explanation, that we don't know whether they're 4 or 5. We pour a 5th, we don't drink it. Why is it called the cup of Elijah? Not necessarily because he's going to drink it, because this is the cup of the person who will tell us whether we should drink it or not. We drink 4 cups, we put a 5th cup there. Hopefully Elijah will show up and tell us whether we should drink it or not. And that's his explanation.
Again, the role of a prophet, teaching his followers the right path.
Right. He's really a guide, and he's meant to, right, definitely.
Very interesting. It's clear from all of the various texts that you just alluded to that this book has very, very wide appeal, and that was one of the reasons why the judges for this book prize particularly appreciated your work. Who, when you were writing, was the intended readership?
On the one hand, I had in mind this mythical, intelligent lay reader. So I tried to make the text itself, clear enough for people who don't have a strong background in Torah or Talmud or Midrash, or certainly Kabbalah, and then in the notes, to fill it in. It was really in part a way to redeem Elijah for myself, because as a child, as a rabbi's son, I just ran into Eliyahu so often, and at a certain point, you ask, is this real? Who am I waiting for? Is this something that has a connection with reality? So I started doubting Elijah, or just getting tired of Elijah. It's also Saturday night and Shabbat and Havdalah, and how much ritual and prayers can you handle? And then, is he really going to show up? So in a way, it was to redeem him for myself. It's funny, I mentioned to a number of my close friends that I was working on it, and a couple of them just kind of shrugged it off. And one person said to me, at a later point, actually, when I finished the book, one person said to me, it must be humorous, right? And I think that was very telling, because Elijah is so dramatic. He looms so large that either you take him seriously, which is very hard to do, or you find some way to deflect him. And it's something that people are uncomfortable with because of that, because of what we talked about.
On that personal note, in terms of how you wanted to redeem Elijah for yourself, you refer back to your title on the final page of your book, after recounting a Hasidic tale in which a pious Jew asked his rabbi why Elijah never appeared at the Pesach Seder. And the rabbi told him to join with a poor family and provide all of their holiday needs, and Elijah will certainly come. And when Elijah failed to appear, he returned to his rabbi, and the rabbi replied that Elijah had in fact come, but he had failed to see him. And holding a mirror to the pious Jew's face, the rabbi said, "Look, this was Elijah's face that night." And Daniel, you write, here the possibility of meeting Elijah is surpassed as one learns to enact the prophet's quality of compassion, thereby becoming Elijah. In the concluding paragraph of the book, you write, the story of Elijah is not relegated to the past. It's a play in two acts. The first consists of the biblical narrative in the Book of Kings. The second is its sequel, still unfolding, endless. In the global audience, each of us is a latent participant in the performance. Your own potential scene, your experience of Elijah is unscripted, for he appears only by surprise. I wanted to know, from your personal perspective, what does becoming Elijah mean to you?
First of all, I want to thank you. I want you to read from now on. If I have to read a passage, I'll get you to read it. It really means two things. I intended two things by the title, and I'm hoping that readers first think that it's one thing and then only discover the second toward the very end, either that last page or the last few pages. So what it means on the surface, what it means overtly, is that it takes Elijah a long time to become Eliyahu Hanavi. Cynthia Ozick says something very interesting. She says, Elijah the prophet is totally different from Eliyahu Hanavi. Elijah the prophet is this biblical zealot. Eliyahu Hanavi is the figure who's there. We open the door, we pour the cup. He's going to help us. He's going to redeem us. So that arc we've been discussing, she describes it that way. That
transformation from Elijah the prophet to Eliyahu Hanavi.
Hanavi, right, exactly. So on the one hand, becoming Elijah means how he turns from Elijah the prophet to Eliyahu Hanavi. On the other hand, it refers to what you read there, that each of us has some possibility of becoming Elijah. What does that mean? I think what helps us understand that is what I read about near the end of the book, right before what you read, what's called Bechinat Eliyahu, a quality of Elijah, an aspect of Elijah. And Hasidic teaching makes the case that each of us has a spark of Elijah within us. Each of us has that Bechinat Eliyahu, a potential for what? You could say, to learn how to transform rage into compassion. That would be one way of saying it. Each of us has the possibility to draw on those destructive, chaotic energies and create something with it, right? What the rabbis describe and the mystics describe as serving God with the Yetzer Hara, drawing on that wild, chaotic energy and sublimating it or channeling it. So becoming Elijah also means learning to draw on that passion within and channeling it for the good.
Well, I can tell you as a reader, you achieved your objective. I certainly did have that understanding of the arc or the transformation, but only in those last few pages, right. I saw this other level of meaning in becoming Elijah.
Right. I had to control myself from saying it earlier in the preface, and right. I wanted that, so that's great to hear.
Right. I want to thank you so much for your time and for such a insightful and riveting work. It really will make a tremendous contribution to contemporary Jewish thought, and we are thrilled that Becoming Elijah is the inaugural Sacks Book Prize winner. Congratulations, and thank you again.
Thank you, and thank you for helping to do what you just said. Now it's going to reach people who will really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. We're grateful to the Rohr family, who appreciates the influence of books in shaping the Jewish future and continues to support literary contributions in contemporary Jewish thought. We, at Yeshiva University's Sacks-Herenstein Center, look forward to next year's Rabbi Sacks Book Prize and hope this award will catalyze more inspired and inspiring Jewish writing and scholarship.